I got 3 Ks to remember: known area, known speed, and a known amount of seed. The known area, whether you're doing it on the barn floor or you just have a row out behind the house that you know how long it is. Known speed, well, that's a comfortable speed. You're not going to fly across there. You're going to plant it at 3-4 miles an hour at the most. A known amount of seed, weigh out X amount, dump it in there. You're kind of guesstimating where that thing's supposed to be set. It surprises you sometimes it has to be wider open than you thought and closed up. And you go plant that row. Then you come back to the barn, and this is where the vacuum cleaner comes in real handy, is it cleans out the planter lots easier. You vacuum it back out and weigh what you got back out. What you put in minus what you got tells you about how much you planted on that strip. You can do it on the barn floor too, but it's kind of messy usually. Dollars per acre, seed cost, that's important. Although seed cost is usually 5% of the whole budget at the most. So that comes into knowing how many acres you got to plant and about how many pounds you want to plant. Equipment costs and application costs. If you're going to hire somebody else to do it, he's going to charge you by the acre. He may sell you the seed too, who knows. Or you could find someone that would rent one, or go buy your own drill, or the association buys a drill, who knows. Blood, sweat, and tears, I always put that one in. It's also known as stress and no sleep. Worrying about it coming up, you got to factor that in. And with the almond guys, I always have to tell them, plant your cover crop first and then go elk hunting. Because what happens is they get all done, and they're about done right now. They get all done, and they go elk hunting for a month. And then they come back and they want to plant their cover crop, and it's rained 2 inches. And they're out there putting it in the mud and just having a mess. Return on investment, that's a question right there. It's always difficult to calculate that. Do the vines look happier? Or did you accomplish your goal? Did you actually make the canopy suck down a little bit and not be so bad? So the 3 basic systems. Plow down systems, that's the peas, beans, and vetch. That's usually pretty popular. Produces lots of organic matter, potentially a whole lot of nitrogen. Depends on the blend. You're going to replant that sucker every year, and you're going to be planting about 100 pounds of seed. It's usually fairly cheap. But again, then we go back to the blood, sweat, and tears and the equipment costs and all the other fun things that go into it too. An annual reseeding system is lower growing. It makes less organic matter, usually makes less nitrogen. But if you manage it just right, and we get a couple of years where it rains normally, they're self-perpetuating for a while, like about 5, 6, 7 years. And the perennial grass or sod system, I put it in here because it is a viable option in some situations. It's a long-term solution for certain situations. I get a lot of people want to plant that because it sounds easy. Well, that's the most difficult one to manage and keep alive and keep going. Traditional plow down cover crops made of annual legumes and small grains. Oat, faba beans or bell beans, small seeded horse beans, forage peas, vetch, oats, barley. Up here, barley would probably be a better choice, actually. It's intended to produce organic matter or carbon. Usually it's a net increase to the soil nitrogen. It's easy to establish and it's easy to manage. And it gets to a certain size and it's going to frost 3 days from now and I'm about ready to bud break. Hey, shred it up and just get under. Must be incorporated to work the best, although you can mow it and just let it lay on the surface if you want a mulch on the top of your soil. Biggest trick with that is the legumes all die and the grass comes back, at least until it runs out of water. An annual reseeding one can be made of annual legumes. We can put forbs in it. We can put grasses in it, kind of somewhere between an annual clover mix and erosion control mix. Self-reseeding, they're annual plants, just like all the grasses in the foothills around here anymore. Summer dormant, in other words, they're dead in the summertime, so they're not sucking any water up. Relatively low maintenance. You got to do a little bit of work with them. Good soil coverage once they get going. Biggest problem is they're real slow growing in the wintertime, so the later you plant them, the slower they are to cover the soil. Perennial grass cover crop. Better access in the wintertime once it's established. Early soil protection in the fall because it's there already. Summer dormant can be done, so it's lower water thing, but you will find all the leaks in your drip systems and any springs that you didn't know you had, because there'll be green spots out there. Reduces dust. You're driving on some grass, stuff, whatever, so you're not billowing dirt dust up in the air. Year-round soil erosion protection. They are kind of hard to establish. They are kind of expensive to establish, and they probably would not work up here because they will compete into the spring with your vines for water. A traditional cover crop, bell beans, peas, vetch, small grains. If you're organic, it's harder and harder to get away with saying I couldn't find it because there's more and more of it organically available now. Although supplies are usually a little limited and it always costs more. Fall planted, it takes a good seed bed. It doesn't take a great seed bed. 80 to 120 pounds, you can stick it in the ground 3/4, even an inch deep. Drill works best. I've seen it done with a disc. I've seen it done with rototiller, whatever you got equipment basically. The goal on this one is to maximize your plant mass while considering your other things. Frost control. If it gets too tall, there's no airflow out there, there's no radiant heat. Okay, maybe we're in trouble. That's where the skip row kind of comes in. Soil workability. If you're making sparks with the disc out there trying to work it in, then yeah, it's a little too dry. Or if you're out there making mud balls, it's a little too wet. Your nitrogen release, it's going to make it available to the vines. Vines will take nitrogen from a cover crop system, usually from bloom through veraison is when they're picking that nitrogen up. The nitrogen that the vine's using to get to bloom is coming out of the carbohydrates and storage in the trunk and the crown. Bell beans, probably everybody's seen them at one time or another. They're this funny looking plant, gets about yay big. It's actually a vetch. It can get 6 feet tall. What it's in there for is it makes a lot of nitrogen and a lot of biomass, and it also keeps everything else up off the ground because they can climb on it. Field peas or winter peas, there's a whole bunch of different varieties out there, Magnus and Biomasters and Trappers and Austrians and Dundales and etc. Common vetch usually is what's put in them, usually because it's the cheapest one. It's about 10%. It doesn't really start to grow a whole lot until spring. So about the time it starts to grow real good, you're starting to think about killing it, but it's in there. Purple vetch, woolly pod vetch, a little bit later maturing, do similar things. They're viney versus common vetch, which is usually just kind of a little shrubby little plant. Woolly pod vetch is that beautiful purple flower you see climbing over the fences on the sides of the roads because it was planted into ranges and stuff like that. It has hard seed. It has a real good tendency to manage to make seed every year somehow. If you plant it and you let it manage to make seed, your grandchildren will be cussing you because it will be still there. Small grains are in the mix, or we can use them as a standalone. Forage type oats is usually what we use because it's got a good stalk on it and it's got big leaves and it makes a whole lot of plant matter. They're later maturing than most of the reds, the hay types. Triticale is a cross between rye and wheat, and being a hybrid, it has a whole bunch of different plant shapes. There's one that we move quite a bit of that only gets about this tall by the 1st of March, but the roots are 6 feet down versus normal triticale like Juan or forage type that's about that tall about then. So, and barley, like I said, might be actually a better thing up here. A lot of barley was grown in these hills prior to World War II. It's better adapted to dry sites, earlier maturing. Mustard and radish, I don't think are a real option up here. Probably just not enough rain, not enough soil depth. Manual reseeding, they're all legume and or. We can put Blando Brome or Zoro Fescue in it and make it an erosion mix or more like an erosion mix because those grasses will have a shallow root system and they come up fast. They help protect that soil faster. You'll have all these annual legumes and then you'll put flowers or something like that in there as a insect attractant or a beneficial blend out there. Looks good alongside the winery road, but you know, management, fall planted again. You need a better seed bed for this one because you're only planting 1/4 of an inch deep. And the fewer weeds you got, the better off you're gonna be. 25 to 30, very shallow planted. Springtime mowing basically would be out there, knock the tops off the winter weeds and then let it grow. And it'll get, you know, maybe knee high at the most. It'll bloom, it'll have pretty flowers on it for about a month and then turns brown and icky. Crimson clover, rose clover, the pink one on the side of the road all the time in April and May. Subterranean clovers are usually included in these. They're all Mediterranean heritage, so they like this climate. They have this neat little self-replanting mechanism, like a peanut. They put a flower on and the flower fertilizes and it turns around into a basket, and then the stem starts growing and it's just trying to find a place to stuff that seed head, and it stuffs it back in a crack in the ground if it can find it. So that's just where the subterranean comes from. Thick enough, it does a pretty good job of weed suppression. We put some aerial seeding ones in there. The top one is called Balanza clover. It looks a lot like white clover, but it's not. And the bottom one is a Persian clover. The white one will be blooming in March and the pink one will be blooming in April. And like I said, we can put those annual grasses in there. Zoro Fescue, which is the top picture, and the bottom picture is Blando Brome or soft chess. Both of these are quite prevalent in the hills. Like I said, insectary blends. You put some poppies out there and some baby's breath and a few other things out there, and what it does is, the idea is that at least there's some pollen there because certain beneficial insects, while they're young, they eat other bugs, and when they get old, they have to have nectar because they've evolved to a different form. Perennial sod, again, I mentioned it, native or dryland adapted grasses, they'd be summer dormant, they're deep rooted. If it was in the Pacific Northwest, it'd be perennial ryegrass and vine fescue between the cherry trees. Where it works the best, high water tables, not gonna be an issue here. Solid set sprinklers, I kind of doubt it. Excessive vigor, maybe. It's a long-term investment, it's expensive, it's hard to put in and hard to keep it going. And if you need to find me, there's where you can find me. Questions? What's normal bud break up here?
April 15th.
About the middle of April. Okay. And I got to recalibrate my brain from looking at it down there in the flatland up here, which means I got to add 2 weeks to what it looks like down there. So first of April, it would be about time to knock it down, or start thinking about knocking it down, because that stuff's growing slowly in December and January and February when it's kind of cold and dark and nothing else is growing either. Well, then March, it'll come the last part of March, at least down in Manteca. It grows fast enough. If you stand still, it's probably going up your pants legs sometimes, if there's rainfall. So a good rule of thumb is, okay,
At bud break.
yeah, bud break or a little bit before is when you're going to want to be terminating that. I would love to, yes. I asked Mike also, in the spring it'd be nice if we could go and look at somebody that has planted one out there in the field one afternoon and say, okay, that way I can pull one up and say, that's what this is, and then show you the nodules and all that fun stuff and kind of go through, okay, now it's time to kill it. But yeah, I'd come out and do site, and it's a scientific wild ass guess, I have to admit. I mean, because you're trying to accomplish something, and I'm trying to fit my knowledge of what a plant does into what you're telling me you want to accomplish.
Not a guarantee.
There is no guarantee. Death and taxes is the only guarantee. And if you're good at it, you can avoid taxes.
Is that Phacelia on your?
Yes, that is a Phacelia and a native California bee foraging on it. Digital cameras are just so much more fun than the old ones. You don't have to go to the drugstore and see, oh, that one's out of focus and that one's out of focus.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you guys very much for having me.